Hello, my name is Adwait. I'm an independent curator and writer, and today we have gathered at Bikaner House for a walkthrough of Amjum Rizve's solo exhibition Ra, which I've had the honor of curating. And the exhibition title is derived from a Malayali alphabet and has a phonetic and pictorial role that it plays throughout the exhibition and for which it has been culled. We will get into the pictorial aspects of the title as we proceed through this walkthrough. But before that, I would like to give an overview of the different exhibition contents and the primary source material for the artist. So first and foremost, a lot of the themes of the current body of work extrapolates are to do with Amjum's everyday reality. Amjum is originally from Kannur in north of Kerala, and he is currently based in Mysore. So the current body of work is largely situated in and around Kannur and features everyday scenes of life that Amjum inhabits and has inhabited growing up in this part of the country. We see regularly frequented places like mosques, Sufi shrines, paddy fields, and other such sites that the artist is wont to visiting. And often the landscapes are devoid of characters, and when characters do appear, they become surrealistic and they leave behind their realism and often in favor of more fantastical depictions. So one particular aspect that runs throughout the exhibition and is worth highlighting is Amjum's treatment of reality, because even though the scenes that the works put forward are mundane and everyday scenes from his life, but somehow the representations verge on the fantastical. And I think that relates to how Amjum basically traffics in magic realist elements with particular intentions. The intentions to the magic realist movement at large have something to do with highlighting aspects of reality which regular articulation fails to bring out. And what magic realism does is it's able to bring out certain affects, unprocessed emotions, and often momentous events which an undisturbed reality is unable to represent. And I think it's a similar way in which magic realism has been used throughout this body of work, where these fantastical representations are able to draw our attention to very minute aspects of reality and sort of denaturing it and turning it into epiphanic, which then becomes a source of contemplation for the artist. Amjum graduated from Trivandrum Fine Arts College, and before that the artist had received a traditional education at the madrasa. And there are two aspects of this education which are worth mentioning. One is his training in khatati, or the art of calligraphy, and the other is that of katha prasangam, which is storytelling involving Quranic accounts, but something that the artist has since molded into his practice and uses frequently for his staging and in the various way in which he weaves his narratives and presents his figures. Other than that, like, the art school opened him to art historical references, and there were other points of entry for different kinds of material. In specific, we have references from Persian and Indian miniatures, motifs which have crept into his practice largely through travels of family members to Iran who would bring back knickknacks, articles, and edibles from the Persian culture, and something that inspired the artist to take a closer look. And this is what we see in works like this one over here, where you have these kind of like Persian figures and demonic sort of entities which populate the backgrounds, and the representation of the background itself is very much inspired by Persian idioms of how the mountains, for instance, are depicted in this kind of highly stylized manner. And this is special because by far Persian influence is missing within the cultural idiom of Kerala, which is highly influenced by the Arabic culture. So it's interesting that Amjum in his practice is interested in Persianate elements and is drawn to ornamentation styles and idioms which lend themselves to a Persianate sort of culture, as opposed to the Arabic culture, which is more accessible to him in Kerala. As a child, Amjum was used to visiting Sufi shrines and was exposed to cultures that were secular, and was taken by his mother to nearby towns such as Vanguard, where he would be introduced to Sufi saints, something that he continued later on in his life. And there is a murid that he got in touch with in Kannur, who was quite influential in his life, and with whom he would have long philosophical conversations. And works like this sort of pay homage to this relationship and the saintly company that he has cultivated over the years, where we see a Sufi figure which could be interpreted as his murid, and just sitting in meditation. And this kind of recurring Sufi figure sitting in quietude is the crux of what Amjum is holding throughout these works, or what the drama of all of this ornamentation is centered on. At the center of all of this ornamental vortex, we find stillness, which is very, very contemplative and epiphanic. And this kind of presence can sometimes be allegorical, can be metaphorical. For instance, over here we have another work again, which is sort of represents a moth against a very ornamental background. And the moth is a metaphorical representation of the aforementioned murid. And it takes us back to this key moment in Amjum's life, where shortly after the demise of the said Sufi saint, Amjum visited his dargah, and he had this encounter with a moth which just happened to brush past his garments and then settled on a wall opposite from him. And to him, somehow it was a reminder of his continuing presence. And it is often in these ways that presence and the relationship between life and death is regarded within Sufi cultures, where there aren't strict or rigid boundaries separating realms. And it's interesting because within the context of the show, often these rigid boundaries are reworked through these kind of like heavily ornamental motifs and decorative backgrounds, which has a very interesting effect on reality. So the boundary that guards reality and sort of keeps it in check is in a way dissolved or denaturized by these kind of scintillating details, which then opens it up to other realms, and it allows for slippages between these realms. A Sufi figure which is turned upside down and is seen embracing a deity which is an indigenous deity by the name of Mutappan Thayam. And this is interesting because both these figures are complementary in terms of the politics they represent and uphold. Sufi figures, of course, are known for a secular politics that cuts across orthodox religious lines. And then similarly, we have the Mutappan Thayam, who is known for his anti-caste sort of connotations and is considered as a figure within the community known for his anti-caste discourse, and often through these thayams, which are sacred rites performed by members belonging to underprivileged communities, become an archive, an oral archive of the community's resistance. And in the background, we see the kind of sites where these thayams or ritualistic dances would be performed, namely the sacred groves, which would have limited access. It would, of course, be open to the community members, but because Amjum doesn't have direct access to it, he sort of like holds himself back, and consequently the depiction is from the other side of the sacred grove. So there is this like boundary wall which mediates his access to these cultures which are familiar to him because they're happening in his vicinity and yet are at one remove. So the vantage that we see here in this frame behind us sort of is also inclusive of his criticality towards accessing difference, and represents this kind of tension between curiosity and his wanting to keep himself in check when it comes to accessing a culture or entering a culture. So earlier I was mentioning how in Amjum's practice he's blending different references that he got exposed to. He's obviously taking elements from his training in Khattati and Katha Prasangam and marinating them with more art historical references. One such example is this reference to an Austrian painter, Gustav Klimt, who often worked in a similar ornamental style. And then behind this we have these patches of embroidered fabric which are collaged onto the canvas, and then they are sort of beaded very, very painstakingly to create this kind of backgrounds which unfolds in swathes. And these kind of art historical references can be seen throughout this body of work, where we not only have Western idioms and motifs, but we also have influences that are more Eastern. So Amjum is also inspired by a lot of Japanese woodcuts and artist who works with different techniques. Amjum is primarily trained in painting, and over the years other materialities have crept into his work. So during the lockdown, Amjum was interning with one of his aunts, making wedding dresses, and in response to the needs of the job, where a person who had a limited budget but was nonetheless interested in getting a wedding dress made, Amjum came up with the idea of pasting beads to keep down costs, but of course that came with its own set of limitations in the sense that the dress could only be worn once and could not be washed. And since then, beads were amalgamated into his practice. There, of course, is a longer precedent for inclusion of these decorative techniques within his work, because a number of family members are taken up with enterprise which are to do with designing or decorating dresses. So it's not surprising that Amjum leans into these practices and lets them unfold within his practice. One of the figures that we have over here is representation of another Thayam. Over here we have Pottam Thayam, who is this almost quite mischievous kind of figure, brimming with rebellious energy. And Pottam Devam is known for his dialogue with Adi Shankaracharya and the challenge that he presented to Adi Shankaracharya as a Chandal or a person belonging to a lower caste. And he basically challenged Adi Shankaracharya to reconsider the basis of Varna system by very, very quirky set of interrogation. The choice of figures in this body of work is very, very is selective and is representative of a certain kind of rebellious agency and a very specific kind of politics that the artist is channeling through this body of work. It often remains sort of under the surface, but occasionally it comes out in the form of these rebellious archetypes. So we have, of course, like these kind of like deities which record instances of subaltern resistance, but we also have archetypes such as Iblis, which feature in a number of works, or monkeys like this, which holds a grenade and is almost about to lob it on the canvas across. And then in the canvases, one finds these kind of like mushroom clouds or these kind of nuclear explosions. So all of this somehow connotes a rebellious attitude or a rebellious politics which is taking place on the horizon and is being expressed through this kind of magic realistic depictions and scenography through which they're being staged. So over here again we have a scene which is full of these rebellious demonic archetypes almost gathered in a Sabbath around some kind of ritualistic performance or a witchy practice. And to me, it seems that this is a self-critical gaze that the artist takes on his own gaze as an outsider to these indigenous cultures. Often we, or our gaze towards difference can be somewhat problematic or can be somewhat unprocessed. And I think this is his sort of self-criticality at the gaze that he brings to these passages in sacred groves, or kavu as they're known locally. So the genre of magic realism is quite distinct from pure fantasy, because magic realism still is largely rooted in reality, and then the elements that are magical or fantastical are often used in a way to bring attention to reality or aspects of it. And this is how magic realism pans out within Rizve's work, and this is the way it is being mobilized within Rizve's practice. And I think what I was talking about earlier of how there is this tension between scenes which can be very, very peaceful and tranquil, and yet on the horizon we see sort of unexplained and slightly sort of fantastical or disastrous occurrences happening on the horizon, create this kind of tension, which is very, very key to magic realism as a genre. To go back to the exhibition title Ra, the title was sort of chanced upon between Anjum and I during a conversation where the artist was speaking to me about the different influences in his practice. And Ra was something that was encountered at the crossroads between his exposure to European art idioms, primarily the practice of fauves, as they were called, artists who had very wild strokes, and often the strokes were of this nature of like being slightly curvilinear. And this was sort of met with his former training in Khatati, where again the artist was training his wrists to make these kind of curvy lines. So the curve in a way became the alphabet or the visual alphabet for the artist, and this is how the painterly in his practice is composed. So often when we see these kind of embroidered patches, this curve is recurring or is the formative unit of a lot of these works, and can be seen as constitutive of his practice. But of course, it operates on conceptual registers as well, where, for instance, the curved Ra takes the form of a sickle-shaped moon, which again marks a particular moment from the artist's life where he was deep in concentration of the moonrise in a paddy field, which was submerged with water, and then this perfect moment was destroyed by a carelessly tossed stone by his spear, something that really disturbed the artist at the time. So yeah, this shape again features elsewhere and carries different kind of conceptual hefts. And finally, it also meets the Arabic sound, which is the inverse of this. So in Malayali, Ra is a downward shaping curve, whereas in Arabic it's an upward shaping curve. And when you combine the two, it becomes a circle. So this is the many ways in which Ra features in his practice. Finally, also sort of representing the shape of the mounts in Kabristan, a site that Rizve often represents within his works.